One of my favorite shots is the long shot or the long lens shot. Now, quite often, I'm going to put the camera pretty low to the ground. It's not going to be, at eye height on standards. It's going to be on a baby legs or it's going to be on a hi hat, and it becomes the long and low shot. So let's take a look at the shots, and then we'll talk about them one by one. Now, about these shots. The client for this video was, of course, the Ford Motor Company, and our job was to take a completely stock pickup truck and make it look epic. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to use a telephoto lens, in this case the Canon 70-200, a regular stills lens, combined with a Sony FS7. Now for this shot, I have a real BTS on-the-day photograph, and here is our setup. It's, as you can see, a Red 1 MX and a Canon 600mm lens that was remounted into PL. In the middle of the street, on the deck. And this is something that I'd like to do as often as I can, and very rarely have this opportunity to propose that we do this scene, which is basically a walk and talk, two teenagers doing a walk and talk on the streets of New York, to cover it, as a oneer with a super long lens. At this location, I was able to work in a Canon 300mm coupled to a Red Epic. Now, as you can imagine, an airport hangar and airport in general, they're just simply huge spaces. I mean, just, many football fields inside, at least that's what it seemed. And you could back a camera up, you could back it way up and still get a full body shot at 300 mils. With a long lens, you're able to really compress the space and fill the frame with all this eye candy, all these old jet fighters and other airplanes. If you had a normal lens or a wide lens, all this stuff is going to just look so small in the frame, and simply, it just won't have the same impact. So, 300mm Canon at the airport hangar. Now, for these couple of shots, we used a Cooke S4 135mm coupled with a Sony F55. Now, I could have taken these shots with a wider lens, but I just like the way the background stacks up with the longer lens. And also, of course, I do like the low lens height, as we see here. Here we're using a 300mm to capture the motorcycle's approach right before it gets to its stunt. And quite often, you need to use a long lens purely as a functional reason to capture the scene. And here, of course, we are low and long. Now, this was coupled to a Canon 5D Mark II modified with a PL mount and running Magic Lantern RAW hack, the 14-bit RAW hack. This was taken with a 600mm lens on a Sony FS700, recording 2K RAW to an Odyssey 7Q. Now, here's an actual picture of our setup on the day for this shot. Now, this was actually quite a short shot in the actual edit, and was just used to add some, some tension and action into a, somewhat a mundane process of our hero running from one set piece to another. Now, this is a very familiar shot, a couple walking down the street where he sees his ex and does a double take by having that long lens, which was a Tokina ATX 80-200 coupled with a Blackmagic Ursa Mini, and it just seemed to be the right lens to use. Now, this shot, it's kind of a close-up, but it's also an environmental shot because we have our actress in an environment that she's reacting to emotionally, not verbally. So she's not talking to anybody. She's just listening to the conversation, or more precisely, she's just far away from her peer group conversation. Now, here's the actual setup that I used for this shot. It was a Canon C500 coupled with an Odyssey 7Q, and I'm using a Canon 300mm f2.8 to capture this scenes. And of course, I'm using 300 mils at wide open to really isolate our subject in a close-up, and that's what we're focusing on. Now in this shot we have our hero turning and looking past the camera. This was filmed with a CineoVision 85mm anamorphic lens along with a red Epic. Now I'm using the longer lens instead of a wider lens to basically fill our background with these elements of the sky and the hill that's, again, further in the background. By using a longer focal lens, we bring these elements, we make them larger on screen, which again, to me, it just feels more epic and definitely aesthetically more pleasing by using a longer lens as opposed to a wider lens. And, that's why I really like using long lenses.